Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1083 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Man, this is one of those times where it really pays to be pessimistic. After the last chapter, I thought to myself, look, I've read enough One Piece. There's just no way that we're going to continue on with SABO telling us what actually occurred, right? Like, Oda's gonna wait months, perhaps years to get back here. It's gonna leave as a cliffhanger and we're just gonna sit on it forever. And I am so happy that I was wrong. So happy. Well, yeah, there's other things to talk about in the chapter, so we'll just start off at the beginning. I think that this chapter did more for the Revolutionary Army than, like, as a group. Not as an individual character from the Revolutionary Army, but the army itself. This chapter did more than anything prior ever. For the first time ever, I think that the Revolutionary Army is cool. I understand that this is probably a blasphemous thing to say, and I also understand that, you knew at some point in time that Oda was going to go in with them. I'm just purely commenting on how I actually felt about them as the chapters were passing. Ivankov, back before the time skip, was an incredibly awesome character. And of course, Dragon has a lot of hype, and the moments that he's had in the story have been awesome, but it's really just Dragon and not his organization. So hand over my heart, honest to God, right now, the Revolutionary Army has finally arrived for me. Karasu, his powers were just incredibly surprising and taken in the coolest way possible. I swear, sometimes Oda does some things that make me think that he is literally reading community theories, and he's like, look, okay, I'm gonna do this cool thing with a bunch of birds, and haven't necessarily decided what it's gonna be yet. I'm just gonna see what everyone throws out there and make sure that I one up literally everyone because he did that. But actually, I just said that, but I don't know if I actually mean it, because the way that he split up into crows before was a very weird thing. I think we speculated some things about it. I don't remember what those things were, but I think no matter which direction they went, they were a reach. So this made a surprising amount of sense. It worked really well, and just using the soot fruit powers to do what he did in the first place is just a really creative application. Like, he's just a crow dude, man. He's living out his dreams. But for sure, what I didn't have in my bingo card is I didn't have Morley going toe-to-toe with Admiral Green Bull. But now that it's happened, it makes sense. And Oda made sure to throw in those little power scaling nuggets in there so that you understand that the Marines are handicapped. The Admirals have incredibly destructive abilities. A war taking place in Revujo does not fit. Essentially, they're nerfed. It's a very clever way of using the environment to make sure that your underdog is putting up a fight. And I like the fact that the Revolutionary Army, despite being obviously very strong, is still your underdog. In my very subjective opinion, I think that this was balanced as perfectly as it could possibly be. I like the guerrilla tactic warfare. They are at a disadvantage. That is clear as day. So what do? They do what happens in a lot of real life wars, right? Back in the day, they used to line people up and literally just throw bodies at each other, and who had the most people probably won. And then some people were like, hey, let's go hide in the forest and then pick them off one by one. That would even the playing field. And in fact, it does. So this isn't really different from my interpretation, my impression beforehand, but now we actually see it expressed in the story. The Revolutionary Army does a lot of hit and runs. They have the ability to really mess with the entire structure of how the government works, just simply by being strong enough to be able to survive. They don't actually need to be strong enough to win these crucial 1v1s against the government's top tiers. Mess with supply lines, take a ship here or there. Use Revujo's location against it. That was so brilliant. I love that Oda used that. Yes, it is impenetrable, right? It's so defensible. At the same time, it makes it really hard for allies to get there. And things like food. Walls here serving that double purpose of keeping your enemies out, but also keeping you in, and that mattering. Overall, the Revolutionary Army is incredibly top tier at being disruptive, and that's really all they need to be at this stage. And I'm not discounting Dragon or saying that he's not as strong as whoever. When you get to this level, your strongest subordinates matter just the same. And it's just pretty much fact at this point in time that the Revolutionary Army's commanders are just a step below. At the very least, that is how I interpret it, so if you disagree, roast me in the comments. But it also makes their fight that much more courageous, and I felt that expressed in the story as well. There was just one particular panel where we see Morley fighting Green Bull, and in the expression on his face, it's like, yo, this is a guy that I can root for. I would say that it reminded me a lot actually of the Straw Hats and Luffy in Onigashima before Gear 5th, right? As they initially were struggling and the odds seemed heavily stacked against them, but they kept fighting anyway. It's like, look, and we're going to flex the entire time, even if it's not necessarily the appropriate time to do so, right? And I felt that same sort of vibe from the Revolutionary Army, like they're flexing at the same time with the full understanding and knowledge that death and failure could happen at any moment. But you're also potentially setting up tragedy as well. The Revolutionary Army works because of intricate planning, of making the right move constantly. Just simply stated, you often just want to be stronger. That's gonna create your best chance for survival, so I do worry about them and characters within the army to some extent. Essentially, can their luck run out? Especially now that they have the government's full attention. You've backed a beast into a corner, and that beast is stronger than you are. But all these questions are complicated by the fact that the Straw Hats are the heroes of the story. And that where they go is kind of what matters, and I think most people now are pretty much envisioning a huge climactic battle between Elbaf and Laugh-Tale, or at Laugh-Tale, or at Elbaf, sometime where the Straw Hats are currently heading, and that would have to include the Revolutionary Army, you would think. So what we lack right now is an understanding of what's going to bring the Revolutionary Army to where the Straw Hats are. I feel like that's been one of Oda's main goals with Egghead outside of Egghead, right? We're in the Egghead arc, but there's a lot of events going on elsewhere. But Shanks is heading for the One Piece, and he is acquiring the means to be able to find it, the road poneglyphs. I'm assuming Blackbeard is doing something similar, obviously as a pirate as well. You know where he's heading. All the pirates actually work the same way. Cross Guild. Buggy just expressed his desire to become king or find the One Piece. When it comes to the Marines, if you separate them into both factions, both have plenty of motivation to follow the pirates as they get closer to the One Piece. They're natural enemies, so the government may follow them. But the Revolutionary Army doesn't necessarily need to, because the pirates aren't necessarily their enemies. So there is pretty major potential here for something totally game-changing, and I hope that you guys can kind of see that. The Revolutionary Army's plan, which they stated was successful, or is successful, is to trap the Celestial Dragons in Mary Joie and starve them out. So Celestial Dragons are trapped within their bubble. They've got to come back into the story in some way. I think that we might get some clarity as to why a member of the Gorosei is no longer in Mary Joie and soon to be present in Egghead. This is actually a big question that I've had for a long time, and potentially genius solution if this is right. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but it just doesn't seem likely that the Straw Hats are going to go back to Mary Joie at this stage, right? It's like there's going to be some sort of climactic final battle that takes place in Laugh-Tale, and that's where the story ends, right after the One Piece is found. So this may have been Oda's, in my opinion, pretty genius solution of getting the characters and the players that you want in Mary Joie to where they need to be. And of course, right now we're just talking about the Gorosei, but I presume that Imu needs to eat as well. If the Revolutionary Army continues to be successful with their siege, this is how you get Imu out. And so from the Revolutionary Army side of it, maybe they sense that their enemies are fleeing and they go for the throat, right? They go for the kill. And that's what takes them to this final battle as well. I'm not too sure. Maybe Imu gets desperate and then throws out more of the big guns like what he did with Lucia, and that matters in some way. I'm just saying that big things, game-changing things, could be on the horizon. But yeah, just some thoughts that I had is, first off, I'm thinking about Kuma. Now, we don't know if Kuma is actually heading towards Mary Joie. He may just be passing through. I don't think that's particularly likely, but it is certainly possible. But if Kuma is heading to Mary Joie, now with context surrounding their predicament, it makes you wonder what's going on there. And I suppose that we should actually verbalize here that SABO knows something incredibly important. Likely it has something to do with Imu. Obviously, we're going to continue this story in the next chapter, but SABO didn't kill Cobra. Cobra is heading to go meet the Gorosei. He ends up dead. So SABO knows something at the very least that by itself could severely change things. He's about to tell the Revolutionary Army, and they're going to probably do something with that information. In all honesty, I believe for a long time that the cards are, at this moment, stacked pretty heavily against the government, just from what people know that they've been doing and the actual things that they've been doing. It's enough to legitimately turn the entire world against them if that news gets out there. And Morgans would be all about reporting it, you better believe it. I honestly find it pretty crazy how Oda has made knowledge such an important component of everything that's happening right now. It's absurdly fitting from a theme standpoint. It's obviously pretty easy to think about the One Piece, the treasure. Roger had it all in certain ways, but knowledge is a part of that, big part of that, and you can see that clearly with the Void Century, but present day stuff matters as well. We've gone in great depth in the past talking about how One Piece is a parable of Buddhism. It reflects some of the core ideologies of that belief system, and one of the major end goals of it all is liberation, and you achieve liberation with knowledge. I think that it's really easy to overlook these sorts of details from this front, but these are the things which makes One Piece a deeper story than essentially anything else that you'll read that is anywhere close to this length. And also, regardless of what I've said here, we still need the destruction of Fishman Island in some way, and a lot of people have tied that with the potential destruction of the Red Line. So, you know, how that ties in matters as well. Half of me wonders, and bear with me here, half of me wonders that if the government loses Mary Joie for one reason or another, does Imu just set the weapon that killed Lelousia on Mary Joie? Just wipe it from the map? Certainly it has been very well established that the government will cover up losses. It would be a bad look if the Celestial Dragons, the Gorosei, Imu, everyone was sort of forced out and then somebody else raises their flag there. But I think for sure the Great Cleansing is going to become a focal point soon. There's not that many islands left, there's not that much story left, and the cleansing could include Mary Joie itself. And Mary Joie sits over Fishman Island, so I kind of connect these things right now. But if you can't tell, pretty obviously there's a ton of possibility right now, so I don't want to get too heavy into the weeds, just spark some thoughts here and there, and you know, the chapters will come. But anyway, to continue on with the chapter itself, obviously the Revolutionary Army explains what their goals were, what they accomplished, and how they see it going from here, and overall it's a very optimistic vibe. I think I said some months ago that it seemed like the Revolutionary Army was losing. Well, wrong. And a big reason I'm wrong is I didn't know about the food stores, right? And using Mary Joie's location against it changes the game pretty considerably. But there's one thing that Dragon still seems concerned about, and it's not Cypher Pole, and it's not the Marines, and it's not the Celestial Dragons or their allied nations. He says our real battle will start when they mobilize God's Knights. And in the background we see 9 silhouettes. The forefrontmost one looks a lot like Shanks. So, oh my gosh guys, there is so much to talk about here, from theory crafting standpoint, possible connections, this faction itself, and discussion about the storytelling aspects of this as well. So I guess we'll just start off with the storytelling aspects. It's, you know, I think some people feel a certain way about a faction that is this important being introduced this late in the game without any real setup. If you quantify the Revolutionary Army's conflict as with the world government, right? These God's Knights are now being established as their main foes, which replaces or displaces both Cypher Pole and the Marines. It's kind of a big thing to let us in on at this stage. And I've definitely already seen some people express that this has them at least somewhat concerned about the trajectory of One Piece and how everything is sort of going to come together at the end. But the real thing that I want to express here is that writing a story over a 25-year period, what Oda has already accomplished is just simply absurd. And so he's obviously had a lot of ideas about in-game characters that, you know, from the start, right? We usually see almost every major group make an appearance, well, hundreds of chapters, many hundreds of chapters before they actually do anything. And it's absent in this case, and I pretty much believe it has everything to do with, you know, Oda now has probably a fully fleshed out thought, fully planned out the entire end of the story. The majority of the beats, I think all those conversations and plotting has taken place, and I think maybe he realized that he needed something else. I think the honest truth is that with the present events in the story, Cypher Pole and the Marines, the Admirals specifically, are both lesser than I think a lot of people thought that they would be. And sometimes that just happens. Like you're you have an idea, right, and it doesn't always play out exactly how you want to while you try to maintain an interesting story as we go along. He doesn't have the ability to go back and edit it, right? He can't just write it out, see if it works or not, see how it might impact the future, and then change it. It doesn't work that way. And I think we've sort of run into that sort of wall here. So I don't think that this is something that was always in the story. I just don't think so. If it was, Oda would have alluded to it, because Oda loves doing that. So I definitely think that you could consider this to be an imperfection compared to the standards that Oda himself set, but Oda's standards are just so inhuman in the first place that I would forgive him every day of the week. And I don't think that you should be concerned about this at all either, because obviously if he's introducing the faction, he feels like they're needed. And this is better, rather than trying to make the Marines or Cypherpole play a role that they're just not suited for anymore. This is what you should do. And frankly, what 99.999% of all stories would do. You need something, you add something. But to sort of expand on my thoughts here, I just see the Marines as a separate entity from the world government. They're just two different things, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Akainu butt heads with the world government at some point as well. I mean, pretty much any time that we see him interact with the Gorosei, they are arguing. And Akainu may look at all of these events that are taking place, potential reveals about what, the underworld and connections and such, and essentially say, look, you guys have failed in your responsibility. You have made my job harder, so now I am your enemy, right? And then suddenly, the Revolutionary Army trying to take down the Celestial Dragons doesn't make them enemies of the Marines. With Cypherpole's gotten really complicated recently. I don't know if you guys remember at the end of Onigashima and Wano, we see them interact in the story to some degree, and specifically the leader, when he attacked Kaido, there are some things there that complicate Cypherpole and make me very curious about them. Mainly, I wonder how much agency they have and if they're actually doing what they want to do and whether or not they're going to stay loyal. But now that we have Lucci as a member, potentially a highlight member, I kind of think Lucci is the strongest member of CP0. I don't think that they really pose a kind of combat threat that would really push the Revolutionary Army or make them scared. Cypherpole seems like it's just really transformed into, and may have always intended to be, information related. They're meddlers. Their actual combat strength is secondary to the other things that they're doing. And again with Lucci, the story beats here are just weird because we see him in Egghead and pretty much all he's doing is disobeying the directives of both the government and the Marines. And it seems to be, Oda's doing something weird with him, is how I feel. So I see God's Knights as being the true supreme weapon, people-related weapon, that the Celestial Dragons and the world government itself has. So to talk more specifically about them, Dragon talks about mobilizing God's Knights, which is, I think Oda's trying to rationalize why we don't know about them already, is that they've been in hibernation, so to speak. Only certain things would actually create the necessity for them to interact at all, and we're reaching that stage. But the theory crafting is pretty insane. I think that it is obvious. Oda wants us to think that Shanks is God's Knight, and on several different levels, okay, things start to add up, which not anyone was ready for, or very few people were ready for. First off, we learned in the new One Piece film Red, that Shanks is likely a descendant of the Celestial Dragons by blood. Roger found him as a baby in God Valley. He hails from the Figureland family. In my opinion, this is a great theory because we know that God Valley happened about 40 years ago and Shanks is 39 years old, and again from the movie, the Shanks bloodline is important. We also know that Shanks has just got some weird things going on where he was fully capable of finding the One Piece throughout the journey, but just doesn't do it. We see him interestingly talk to the Gorosei and warn them about a certain pirate, and we have a lot of reason now, for sure, to question his motives, his loyalties, his allegiances. I want to make sure that I say this out front. There is no way in any universe that I believe that Shanks is not a hero, no matter what he may potentially be doing or scheming. So I basically think he could actually be a member of God's Knights. That could work, and still be the guy that we thought he was from the beginning. It could also be way more complicated than that, and misleading. But yeah, I'm going to try to be careful about how I talk about this because I want to do a whole video talking about Shanks because I think that there's a lot of solo video material here for me, and I can say things about his character and there's a cool video coming here, so I'm not going to say everything that I have. But a pretty consistent thing within the story is that Vegapunk is the greatest scientist alive, and pretty much dabbles in every important invention or science that is taking place currently. And so some other characters that are also renowned scientists are also doing things like the Vinsmokes with clones and Caesar with Smile Devil Fruits, but Vegapunk always does it better. And Vegapunk, when he does it better, does it for the government. So right now we have the Seraphim, and the Seraphim are amazing genetic creations, right? We're taking DNA from like animals and Lunarians and from Chichibukai, and now we have a being that is potentially Yonko level with very minimal effort. They grew it in a test tube, and a couple years later it's ready to go. But we already know how it all started, right? It started with Vegapunk cloning Miss Bakken, and this was revealed recently in the story with Stasi. But it's pretty clear we have some omission here, because the Seraphim seems relatively new. This is hot off the press sort of tech, and Miss Bakken is like from 30 years ago or something like that. So what about all this space in between? What was Vegapunk doing with cloning research? Well, I think potentially you have God's Knights. In my mind, there is no doubt that once Vegapunk successfully cloned one member of Rox, former member of Rox, that the idea probably took hold, and it would be very unlikely that they didn't pursue it, at least in some capacity. So I'm expecting more clones, but these perhaps less attached to Vegapunk like Stussy is, and more taken from Vegapunk since birth, and you know, the government took them. But of course, if we're going along the lines of this theory, we're talking about characters like Shanks, perhaps like Rox, or you know, Gold Roger even. These are powerful characters for sure, but they also have a lot of willpower, individual willpower. They'd be difficult to control. Which on one hand could very easily explain why the Seraphim are the way that they are now. It's like, look, we made these and they were perfectly strong enough for our ends, but you know, the one thing that was lacking is we just need to tell them what to do. They're not trustworthy. But on the other hand, it makes sense, right? This is the backup plan. This is the, well, if we have no other options, we can go here. But bear in mind, this is just an idea for now, and there's many other ways that Oda could take it. For instance, a really cool hypothetical is, rather than clones of pirates, which would seem just like a dumb thing to do, maybe clones of really strong admirals. Who knows? Maybe like Garp or Z, right? I do like this cloning angle because it makes a lot of sense. It's, you know, it could be the One Piece version of the Edo Tensei, where, you know, I know people don't like that trope in general, but scientifically, right, Oda's justified it. But of course, this may not be it. This may border too closely onto what the Seraphim are, and therefore detract from the reveal to some extent. Or maybe Oda just doesn't want to go the Edo Tensei route because of how it's been received in other stories, or is not something that he's personally interested in. So another way is, and you know, of all the tropes One Piece has done, they haven't done this one yet, Shanks has a twin. Look guys, anything is possible. If Roger found Shanks as a baby in God Valley, you know, you never know. Two essentially identical people raised in drastically different environments. That is a pretty common sci-fi sort of deal. And in fact, there's a lot of curiosity about this in, you know, real scientific inquiry in the real world. Obviously, there's limits as to how you can actually test this, but for examples that have occurred by chance, I watched a documentary about it a few years ago, and it was pretty interesting. Identical twins separated at birth due to various circumstances. I think that it is cool, therefore it is possible. But all of this is being built off of the observation that the front and center silhouette there looks a lot like a silhouette of Shanks. It doesn't have to be. Another interesting possible connection is the name God's Knights themselves. You know, celestial dragons are referred to as gods, and we had an arc about this in Skypiea with, you know, the leader of the Skypians, or the Sky Islands there, was God. And the former god was named Gonfall, and after he was defeated, he became, you guessed it, a knight. So I wonder if there could be some parallel here. It can be taken in a number of ways, but just you can simply think of God's Knights as, in some capacity, taken in some way, former gods. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to hold off with the entirety of my thoughts about Shanks, and even speculations about God Knights. Let's let it simmer for a little bit, see what the community comes up with, see if different thoughts occur, but I do like it. I do like it. I think, yes, it's pretty sudden, but at the same time, this is what Oda does best, introducing new faction, designing them, finding a story for them, and ultimately having that faction play a part. As for the chapter itself, I did really enjoy it. I liked seeing more in depth with the Revolutionary Army. This flashback was so needed, and I'm so glad that we got it. Now I find myself incredibly stressed. Even though I know that Cobra is going to die, I feel it anyway, like sense of, man, do we really have to see this? Even though I do want to see it. It's pretty clear that Lucci is trying to round up Vivi as well for whatever their plan for Cobra is, and I expect that her path is going to cross with Sabo, maybe, and Sabo's going to save her, and then they're going to be concerned about Cobra, and that's how we're eventually going to get to that picture that Morgan's had with Sabo standing over Cobra's dead body. But I'm pretty sure that Oda is just going to blow us away, and it's probably not hard to do. So yeah, as always, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you know something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Remember to check out my book, The Booms, Volume 1 and 2 is out. Links in the description as well as pinned in the comments. I really, really appreciate it for everybody who checks it out, reads it. And if you do, let other people know. Leave a review. In hindsight, I regret a little bit splitting the book up into volumes. Not because I don't like the volumes as they are, but the big moment comes here soon with Volume 3 coming up. And that's the moment that I think everyone's going to know that this is something crazy. I made something that I think can be read in the same way that I read One Piece, which I'm pretty proud of, to be honest with you, and you really know it, starting about Volume 3. But yeah, like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.